Well,
Sounds like you've been on a journey, and I'm all about helping somebody who's on a journey.
that is fair to say.
How old do you know?
I am 35.
Still got a long way to go, buddy.
Roger. Well, sure hope so. Yeah. All right. So to start, and I'll dive into the newer questions that of the interview that we've done via email.
Sure.
But tell me about what you can about your own experiences with creativity and inspirations for writing songs.
Oh my. That's like saying, so tell me about life. You know, I covered early on, I had an itch to, I guess for lack of a better term, quote, say something, unquote, but I wasn't sure what it was, and I didn't want to talk out of my rear end. To be a little more specific, you know.
Okay.
I work better with specifics in terms of giving you what you're looking for.
Sure.
Okay, I'll give you. Okay, I was born deaf. My tonsils and adenoids were overgrown, and so I could not hear. I didn't have like 80 or 90% of my hearing, but my lungs were underdeveloped. Ha ha ha. And so they couldn't operate to remove the blockage from my ears till I was about 3 years old. So my folks got the idea of laying my head on giant stereo speakers like they used to have back in the 60s, you know, when I was a child, and just lay my head on there because I wasn't talking, I wasn't responding, I was just kind of a flesh lump. And the old story goes that the old family story goes that I could actually sing before I could talk. You know, I'd see people in church singing, and I'd sing, you know, The Sound of Music or Italian opera or whatever came to me. And I really, music and songs and things like that, that was my first communication. So it's always been kind of a primal thing for me, which is, I think, where the need to perform the way I do and communicate the ideas that I do when I perform comes from. So.
Okay. Well, I was kind of telling you a little bit before we hit go on this thing that, you know, my creative journey was for a long time kind of endless, sort of chasing a ghost almost.
Yeah. Well, you're not really sure where it's going to lead, especially since you're not. I mean, you're a musician, you have musical talent, but where's this intellectual and emotional drive bringing you, especially, you know, the experiences you've had, you know, you have to wonder. Yeah. And I'm sure there's also a fair amount of self-preservation on both ends of that. You know, you don't want it to lead you to the pit of despair, but at the same time, you also are curious to see, like, if this road leads to any sort of personal enlightenment, you know, however that colors itself, you know.
There's certainly been a fair amount of enlightenment that personally anyway, that I've found along the way. Is there such a thing as a standard or foundational method that you follow for writing songs?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I like a song to have a good melody because I enjoy melody a lot. In fact, I enjoy melody a lot more than lyrics, simply because, you know, a melody is just something that people will latch onto, and they'll find, you know, as we find with a lot of, you know, the recent popular music, if something has a catchy melody, you'll find yourself singing ideas that would be abhorrent to you.
Right.
But, you know, I really enjoy a good melody. I enjoy when a melody, there's a certain lilt to the melody and it takes you somewhere emotionally. I enjoy, you know, there's a combination of notes that can do that, but I've never really put that together mathematically. If something pops up and it moves me, I go with it. As far as words go, I try not to think. I try not to think, this song, I want this song to be about this, I want this song to be about that. I try to, you know, I always tell musicians, young musicians, you're trying to get to the point, not where you play the music, you're trying to get to the point where the music plays you.
Okay.
Now, it might be a small bit of cliche, but you're getting to that point where, you know, any creative individual worth his or her salt understands on some intuitive level, no matter what their personal beliefs are, that there is another element at play. I watched a documentary about the rock band The Police, who I wasn't really a big fan of, but it looked interesting. It was something that was done by the guitar player, and he told the story of the band by telling the story of their reunion tour that they did in 2011, and he took the whole tour and linked it up to time periods in the band. It was a really interesting way to look at it and a really interesting way to tell the story. And he would always, they would always talk about, because there was only 3 guys in the band, they were always talking about the 4th guy that showed up. Okay, the 4th guy showed up, that it was that element of just something greater than the sum of its parts. You know what I mean? And you have to understand, as a creative person, there is a lot of that. You have some, what is the like the old analogy of Mozart versus Beethoven. Mozart, supposedly the stories go that he just heard everything and took dictation from the angels, for lack of a better term, whereas Beethoven had to sweat over every single note. Right. And they're both wonderful. It's just different paths to the same door, I guess. So I let inspiration, or when it comes to musical inspiration, I let it just come any way it does. Some songs come completely, fully formed. I mean, it's just literal. I just see the whole thing, and I have to write it down at that moment, or I will lose it. Some songs, I'll get a little piece here and there. Like that song, How Do You Tell Someone? That song literally took me like 2 to 3 years to write, because I just got little pieces. Jenny Says was the same way, but something like, what else is on that album? New Orleans, Take Me Back to New Orleans. Totally right there. Bam.
Yeah.
Easy. That song, easy to bitch, easy to whine.
Mm-hmm.
Totally right there. Anyway.
Sure. All right. So you said, in response to my question, what kind of life do you enjoy these days? What's your day to day? And you what's that?
What did I say?
You essentially said there ain't one. No real consistent day to day for me. My kids live in North Mississippi, the whole paragraph of that. And then if there is a consistency in my life, it will be the constant movement. But I've been traveling constantly for all of my adult life, so I'm used to it. I'm not really good at staying still.
Yeah.
And then I respond in this hypothetical meeting, I don't do well sitting still either. It's my overactive brain. I usually bore so easily with things that don't retain my interest. What's that they always say? That the only constant is change, I think.
As far as consistency, as far as my life, that's still pretty consistent. I'm still more comfortable moving than I am staying still. But, 2020 taught me the value of staying still, which wasn't, even though, yeah, it was a terrible thing the world went through. It wasn't really that bad for me. Like I said, I had literally gotten married the week before. And, I got to basically honeymoon with my wife for a while, which was nice.
Sure.
Day to day consists of either putting out fires or trying to start new ones.
Roger. So I respond then to that answer. I kind of cut in. I hear your voice ringing in my head right now, man. Sorry to change the subject. And then in the book, I sing, take me back to New Orleans and drop me at my door. And then it phases out. I sang out of the space between us. Do you not have a house in New Orleans anymore? And then it says, he laughed, decent voice, bro. And then a house answer.
That's funny. Yeah. I still have a house in New Orleans, but New Orleans is always home. My wife and I are from there. All our family's still there. And even though I travel around a lot, New Orleans, as far as the geographical location goes, New Orleans is home. As far as emotion, wherever my wife and children are is home.
Mm-hmm. Then I said, do you have any regrets in life, and would you have done anything differently? I can read that back to you if you'd like to hear it.
Too many.
The answer was, oh Lord, everybody has regrets in life. I went through a process about 10 years ago trying to figure out how the hell I ended up where I had, analyzing every major life decision I made. I found myself bewildered with my life, restless and envious of other people's supposed success and happiness, and frustrated at my perceived lack of both. Then I cut in.
My self-perceived lack of both.
Say, I find that so hard to believe. The rock star life is the dream, right?
Well, perception is everything.
Can you indulge any more on that?
Well, yeah, it's just like, look, I'm just a guy going through life just like you are, just like anybody is. I will say, I'm very grateful and I'm very fortunate. And I realize that now. At the time, maybe I didn't realize I was as fortunate as I was, so I didn't express as much gratitude. But I also learned that the more gratitude you express in this life, not only to those around you, but to, the big guy upstairs, the more life tends to hand you things to be grateful about. So there was that. I had to learn that lesson. And in the constant pursuit of go, 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 it wasn't until I was forced to stop that I really could see, what my life, but how my work and my life had affected those around me, both positive and negative. And, like during lockdown, it was the first time I really had an enforced stationary period. I mean, I just, all of a sudden I had nothing to do.
Right.
And that was time since literally 1985,
Yeah.
And I'm not complaining. That's the way I wanted it. But, there's a lot of things I missed out on. I missed out on events with my family. My mom and dad both passed. Thankfully I was around for both of those. But it's just, you just live life. We're all living lives just to try to figure out what's going on, who we are, what we are, where we want to go, and what we want to do, if indeed we want to go anywhere or do anything, and everybody has to make that decision for themselves. There's no, I don't believe there's any real individual sense of destiny other than what we choose to bring to it. Some people feel that, and it's great. I felt it, but at the same time, I realized that I felt it because it was what I wanted to do. I can't put this on the world around me.
Right.
It's like, I didn't realize, until like lockdown, that so many people had gotten so much out of, what the band did, songs I'd written, the little acoustic shows I was doing, things like that. And I was just doing those things to express myself, to get, to express my restlessness, and other people were getting a lot out of it, and it's like, okay, well, maybe I haven't wasted the past, 20 something years of my life. And it's not a matter of, it's not a matter of feeling sorry for myself. It was a matter of just wanting to know that, realizing and accepting that I'd gotten a lot out of what I was doing, but it was nice to know that other people were getting some good. It's a good thing to put out in the world, and it happens at every level, no matter who you are, no matter what you do. It's just, there's, you just want to be able to, if you're interacting with the rest of the energy of the world, you want that interaction to be something that people benefit from. Right.
Well, that's really, I was quoting your music in my book, and that's what prompted my reaching out originally, was to get your approval to keep those quotes in. It led all the way to this. So I'm very happy I reached out,
I am too, Jim.
Thank you. During that process, I realized over a few years that I most likely would have made the same decisions and mistakes again, given the situations, emotions, and knowledge I found myself in or with at the time.
Yeah.
I had to accept that I'd always tried to make the best decision I could, didn't always succeed, but I always tried. That gave me a fair amount of peace within myself. I figured if God could forgive me my sins, that I can give myself a break. The hardest person to forgive is yourself. But if you can do that, it does make things easier.
That's the key. The hardest person you'll ever try to forgive is yourself. I mean,
Then
you
I
know,
jump-
you know.
right. Then I jump in again and I say, well, what role does God play in your life now?
Okay. The answer about God is such a it's so multi-pronged, and once again, you know, it's all about perception. You know, you say one thing, and one group of people will take you as some sort of, you know, Pentecostal, yada yada, you know, Bible thumper. You know, everybody has their own preconceived notion. So all I can tell you is my thought and my experience. You know, for me, you know, your relationship with God is paramount. Everything else is secondary from there.
Okay.
Also, but it also depends on how you view God. If you view God as some distant figure far away in the canyon, in the sky, you know, telling you to do things that sometimes work, but also sometimes don't, you know, I mean, that, you know, you have to do these things to please him. And, you know, you're forever, you know, like an original sinner, all that stuff, like that stuff we learned in our upbringing as Catholics and things like that. Do as we say, not as we do. Oh, and give us your money. But you know, just the realities that get thrown at you, you can either, you know, throw them aside. And for me, there was a lot of anger with that. So I kind of rejected a lot of it. But I also hopefully was intuitive enough to understand that from a very young age, that everything I was told about God from, you know, the supposed authority figures, you know, a lot of it was bullshit that was designed to kind of be more of a control system than anything. You know, do this, don't do that. And then you see the guys who are telling you these things doing the things they're telling you not to do. And there's a certain amount of, okay, you know, I do that with my kids sometimes. Say, do this, and they'll say, well, Dad, we've seen you do that. And I'll say, I want you to be better than me, you know? Yeah, but, you know, blatant just hypocrisies and things like that. While I try not to be judgmental, I also have to kind of, you know, there's an element of self-preservation as well. You know, don't beat yourself in the head just because some guy in a robe says you have to. Don't, you know,
Right.
you know, for lack of a better term. And I just learned over the years of just a lot of study and just a lot of my own personal experience that God is very real, and that God is not some far off character who lives in the skies. You know, God is, you know, what's the saying that's in, I think it's in the New Testament, nearer than your hands and feet. You know, God dwells within us. And so therefore we are individualized expressions of the energy of God every single minute of every single day. But we all, you know, so that also kind of opens your eyes and your psyche to some potentially horrible truths, you know, man's inhumanity to man, all that type of stuff, you know. And I find that, you know, there's, you know, I think Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she was the one who came up with the idea of the 5 stages of grief. She also said something I thought was pretty interesting, and that basically there were 2 real emotions. There's love and there's fear. You know, and you can kind of, when you look at everything in your life, you know, actions you take or actions you don't take, you can kind of find a grounding that says, okay, why did I do that? And you might say something like, something innocuous, like, I don't know, everybody's individual. like to put out something like an example would only resonate with me individually, and that would be kind of foolish. Everybody has reasons why they do things. Everybody has reasons why they don't do things. And like when I said that I went back and tried to examine my life and see why I'd made all the decisions I made, it wasn't, it wasn't primarily to forgive myself. I just wanted to know why I was where I was, for not any. Well, I just wanted to understand myself, so my decision-making capabilities would be better, since there were other people who are now dependent on me to make good decisions. It wasn't just me being crazy Fred, the rock and roll, the rock and roll hellion, who's secretly trying to put out, ideas that are empowering, So it wasn't just about me anymore. But yeah, I think, God is the primary relationship in your life, because it also reflects your relationship with yourself. And the stronger your relationship is with God, the stronger your relationship usually is with yourself. And from there, after that comes family, all the other things that follow. So for me, God, I got a lot of peace out of the lectures of Joseph Murphy and Neville Goddard, and how they see the world. Basically, your relationship with God is your relationship with yourself, and vice versa.
One of the sort of conclusions I made for myself was that God is sort of the essence of life. God is us. God is everything.
There's some kid who's like just trolling through YouTube one day. Some kid, I just saw this clip and it didn't really resonate with me till later. After I thought about it, I couldn't find it again. Some kid, supposedly a physics wonderkind, was asked about the nature of God, and he said that God is the energy that created us, that acts through us, and that is us. And that's that makes sense to me. I'm not the be all and end all by any stretch, but that makes sense to me. So,
well, no, this, as you kind of said, that this personal journey went on studying your decisions and sort of getting your bearings, I guess, about your life. This whole book project has been the same process for me.
But every day is part of the personal journey. Every day, today, talking to you, going on lunch with my wife, trying to get the car fixed, blah, 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 all that stuff. It's all part of your journey. It's all part of life.
You said in the email, I also understood that perhaps it hadn't been a bad thing that I had not gotten to where I wanted in my career. I obviously wouldn't have been prepared for it, and I might not have survived it. The road is littered with bodies of people who couldn't handle the versions of success. And after all this time, I still get to play rock star around the world with my buddies. But this time I genuinely enjoy, appreciate, and accept it for what it is and for what it's not. Then I jump back in. Can you tell me more about that? What did you expect out of your early career that may have ended so catastrophically?
Repeat the question, I'm sorry.
What did you expect out of your early career that may have ended so catastrophically? If you had found a different success or different level?
I didn't think I could succumb to stuff like that until I saw it in other people who I didn't think could succumb to. I saw it all around me: drug addiction, alcoholism, addiction of all kinds. And I had my own I had to contend with. Nothing that could kill me, but things that can make your life a mess. And it was odd because and all these times I thought I was running towards something, I realized that I was just as much running away from something as well. So the road is littered with casualties. Not just the casualties of the person. There was a really Went to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame one time, and they had an exhibit of personal papers of Jim Morrison throughout his life, and there were like 7 things they left up, and it really told the story like really, really intensely. It's like, there's a card from him, dear mommy, dear daddy, I love you, blah blah blah, Merry Christmas or Happy Birthday or something like that. And then later on, Jim's an exceptionally bright kid from his teachers, and then there's an area where Morrison takes off, goes to California, becomes an acid head, and kind of lucks and smarts his way into fronting a successful band, and his dad was a military guy. It's like, son, I don't think this is a wise choice, blah, 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 but, and then, them trying to come to some sort of terms that they never came to. And at the end of it, the last thing is, hey, your son's dead here in Paris and blah, blah, blah. And it's really, you never think about it in those terms. The rock and roll story is always presented as, as glorious, and it's not. It's messy. Life is messy. There's no happy ending. There's no, the endings, they partied until they lived these reckless lives, and, they died and blah, blah, blah. It's like, for me, like, I always hung with older kids. So I was always into older kids' music. So even though I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, I was still a huge Beatles fan, huge. And then, you think when you're a kid as a musician, who would you emulate? Who would you want to be? Now it'd be somebody like Kanye West or Taylor Swift. Back then it would be like the Beatles. Man, I want to grow up and be the Beatles. And then one of them gets shot dead when he's young. And then another one has a fan break in his house and try to almost stab him to death. It's like, I don't want to be in the Beatles. No, and you see the crap that all these people go through today. And I've been behind the curtain enough to know that basically what you see is definitely not what's really going on.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that, these people deal with that are harrowing, and I'm not trying to judge anybody who's made it to a certain level, but at the same time, I've realized over the course of my life that the price that it takes to get there was not worth it for me.
Okay. Well, to switch gears a little bit to a lighter note, what is it that you like most about life these days?
Life these days is not perfect. I mean, I have problems just like anybody. I have to deal with a lot of garbage, in my life, but at the same time, it's not things about life that I appreciate. It's every day is a new possibility. Every single day is a new possibility. Every morning when I wake up, it's an old phrase, wake up, pray up, try to have a conversation with the big guy, try to put myself in the right frame of mind, right frame of, mentally, physically. Don't always succeed, but I try. And, and once you start off with a little bit more of a grounding like that, I find that life, the more positives of life will present themselves to you, or better yet, you'll be more open to them when they do.
Sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, life is what you choose to make it. We're always taught that there are these extenuating circumstances, and there are. Nobody has it easy in this life. Some people have it easier, but nobody has it easy, right? Nobody, and you never know what anybody's going through. You could look at somebody and see, wow, that person's got it made. I wish I was them. And then, and then it's John Lennon. You come home from a recording studio and you get blown away,
Right.
You leave your kids and your wife, everybody's just, everybody in your life that you've expected, that you've influenced or had any, interaction with, is left picking up the pieces, so nobody has it easy. And I think there's this empathy you have to have with a lot of people in dealing with the situations they're dealing with. And that's just life, but but it is a lot of what you choose to make it. A lot of the things you tell yourself constantly in your mind, a lot of the pictures that you paint in your life, you'll find them actualizing on, on the screen of your life. You know, I think there's probably a certain amount of self-preservation that did not allow me to make those hard decisions that it takes to get to the top of the food chain, because there are hard decisions, ugly decisions you have to make. Am I willing to do this? Am I willing to do what it takes? And, it's best to be honest with yourself. Some people are, and that's great. If they can make it work, wonderful. I wasn't, I could have, made hard decisions that brought me to certain places, but there were things at the moment, that mattered more to me, and I had to make the decisions that I made. And maybe I'd make those decisions differently in hindsight. I honestly don't know. But in the moment, I made the best decisions I could, and I think everybody does, based on what they know and based on what they're experiencing.
Well, did other members of Cowboy Mouth, last 30 years or even now, did they, I guess, want more out of it than you did,
No.
or want to aim higher?
You have to understand the nature of a rock band. Rock bands are basically surrogate families.
Okay.
Always filled with drama, and everybody's got their own agenda. A lot of things, if you want to get into Cowboy Mouth history, there was a lot of different agendas at play. We were not a focused team, unfortunately. There were times when we came together as a team, and good things happened, but there's a lot of different agendas at play, a lot of different egos at play, myself included. But we weren't on the same team, and it got to the point where there were actual destructive elements to the whole that, if they hadn't taken themselves out of the picture, probably would have brought us down. We wouldn't be here today. But I've never understood the idea of having to change what I do with my life based on somebody else's neurosis. It's like, I'm doing what I enjoy. I've created something really strong. If you don't want to do it, that's fine, but I'm going to keep on doing it. Don't try to burn down the house with the kids in it just to prove that you're right. And there's people that would do that, and you have to kind of watch who you surround yourself with, watch who, understand the energy of the folks around you, both not just what they're putting out, but what they're taking in as well, because there's a lot of poison out there, and you just got to be very careful. I mean, when Cowboy Mouth first started, I started it, and I had a definite idea of what I wanted to do on a number of levels. I didn't want to sit in the back, because I'd done that. But by playing in a three-person band before, I kind of figured out that I could work as a front man, because somebody wasn't in front of me all the time. And the band I was in, it was more like there were three front guys. I was like, okay, this is interesting, And then when I formed Cowboy Mouth, I moved the drums up front, mostly because I didn't want to look at a guitar player's ass, but really because I understood that I could do the front man thing. I just wanted everybody to be up front, so there'd be something interesting to look at all the time. It wasn't me up front and other guys behind. It's just, I wanted to be up front where the action is.
Could you always play and sing, or
Yes.
did you develop that?
Yeah. It's something that I understood intuitively when I was a kid. I mean, music came to me very intuitively. I mean, maybe it had something to do with those experiences when I was a child. Maybe I just had an intuitive understanding of it because it was the only thing that was really communicated to me when I was young. I don't know, but music, I've always just gotten it. It's always just been there.
Yeah. Well, I find I do not have the brain power to play with three or four limbs and sing,
Tim, that's your problem. You don't play with your brain.
I guess that's true. Yeah.
I thought about what I did, I'd fuck it up. And I'm not trying to be a smart ass by saying that.
No.
I mean, I've done so much that it's ingrained physically, psychologically, mentally, that when I think about it, that's when I make my mistakes, you know.
Yeah.
And singing, you know, I just had that ability. You know, drumming was always so second nature, and I just enjoyed singing because it felt good. You know, I don't think I'm a great singer or anything like that. I think I do a good job. I'm not one of those guys who can sing the phone book and make it sound great, like, you know, Darius Rucker or somebody like
Right.
that. But you know, I just, you know, I do my thing, and I've learned that life is definitely not what you think it is. You never really know. And the only person you can really depend on as far as perspective goes is yourself. You can only live your life. You know, you look at other people's lives and you might think they have it made, and they may be going through holy hell and just not show it, or at least not show it in a way that you can see it. You know, live your life. This is your experience. You are who you are, you know, and, you know, if you want there to be a reason to it, great. You know, that's up to you. If you don't think there's a reason to it, okay, well, that's up to you too. God lets us make our own decisions. You know, you know, there's an infinite number of choices and possibilities that we can take or make in any given millisecond. But at the same time, you know, God knows what the outcomes will be. I believe this is just my thought, and and allows us to make those decisions, positive or negative. And it's it's odd when you have children. You just see the world differently, and it's like, and it's so funny because, like, when they were younger, something that would happen, like they'd spill something, it would just be apocalyptic, the end of the world, and you just look at them just like, it's okay, we'll clean it up, it's not a big deal. And I kind of imagine the big guy upstairs looking at us like this with all their different crises and shit like that. He's like, oh, okay, clean it up. Things eventually work themselves out if you let them. If you just kind of work towards it. I find as I get older, the less I allow myself to succumb to fear and worry. It's not just being blissed out, not anything like that, but the less you can allow yourself to slide into those fear and worry states, the more productive life is and the more of enjoyable it is. And if you notice, there's a lot of, especially in the last few years, there's been a lot of fear hype, a lot of fear porn on every side of the aisle you can imagine, because there's a lot of people, a lot of folks out there, a lot of institutions that really get off on all of us being afraid. And not to say that there aren't scary things out there, there are, but this is not the only life we live. I know that for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know how you define it. I don't care to define it for anybody else besides me, but I just know for a fact that this life is not all there is.
Okay. Through and say, why Cowboy Mouth? How was that name inspired?
It wasn't really. It was the only name we could all agree on. We had a gig booked. It was very strange the way the band came together. And with me and a couple of friends I knew who were good players, and it made sense that when we played together, it would sound good, right? Except when we played together, it was terrible. It was not only terrible, it was worse than terrible. I was like, why is this not working? I've played with these guys before, both of them individually, never together. And this is terrible. We're fucking terrible. And I ground it out for about 2 months. And I was about to give up because I didn't have any money left. My apartment didn't have any electricity. I was eating white bread and mayonnaise sandwiches. And, I had this moment. I was trying to put this band together, and my power had been turned off, and so I was living in an apartment uptown, a $200 a month apartment uptown New Orleans, when you could do that, and eating white sandwiches. And all I had in the world left was a CD that would allow me to put down enough money to buy a van. That's all I had left. And my parents were in the picture, but their thing was always, you need to stop playing music and go to school and get a job, because that was how they were raised. That was, and they were terrified for me. And I'd had success with this band before, Cowboy Mouth, called Dash Rip Rock, real success, tangible, real success. We could travel to half the country, pack a room, and pay our bills, which is success. We were moving up the ladder, but the other guys' goals were not parallel with mine in terms of where they wanted to go with their careers. And I wanted to be more of a songwriting force, so that wouldn't have fit in with that band. So I left, and I had a friend of mine was an A&R rep, artist and repertoire representative of a label called EMI, and I think it was Manhattan, through EMI. Basically, it was Capitol Records, the Beatles label in the States. And he was a young guy. He just graduated from Tulane, and he offered me a record deal. And I was like, hell yeah, It was good money for what I'd seen. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was more than I was used to at the time. And it allowed me to get off the road and focus on songwriting, because my Dash Rip Rock years were like, it was basically 4 years of holy shit, It was like every insane, debaucherous experience you could be confronted with. Not that I did a lot of that stuff, because I really didn't. I was more focused on career. And the other guys, they were talented, but they were hellions, and they were a little older too. So I was, I'd never really been out of Jefferson Parish that much, out of New Orleans that much. And all of a sudden I'm traveling all over the country, playing shows with my rock and roll heroes at the time, bands like The Replacements, who's that other band? Circle Jerks, things like that. These were my rock stars coming up, and all of a sudden I'm playing shows with these people, and they're coming up and telling me that I'm awesome. It's like, okay. And this is all happening, and these guys really, they enjoyed the rock and roll lifestyle, everything the 80s and 90s had to offer. And, I got sucked into doing a little bit of that stuff, but not too much, nothing really detrimental, but I knew that's not what I wanted to do. Plus there was that sense of kind of nihilism in that, this is all there is, so fuck it, and I was developing an idea. It's like, no, this isn't all there is. And I understood intuitively that what you put out there in the world is what you get back. And even though the band was a great band, it was a very angry band. And the lead guy was a very talented player, very driven character who I learned a lot from. But at the same time, he was also a very angry guy, at the time, as we all are when we're that age. But, I didn't understand that. And I realized that, as much as I loved that version of rock and roll, it was basically driving a fucking, driving a Cadillac 95 miles an hour towards a brick wall. What do you do? So then I got out of that and got the record deal and managed to fail at everything for about 2 years. Everything I touched turned to complete shit. And then I formed a band. I moved to Georgia, formed a band there. It was a good band, but it didn't fly. Moved to Nashville, tried to form a band there. Didn't fly. Lost my record deal, lost my publishing deal, everything, right? The guy who signed me got fired. That was why I lost my record deal. So everything I touched turned to crap. So eventually I was just like, well, I'll go back to New Orleans and see if I can form a band there. People know me there. At least they like me there,
Yeah.
So I moved back, and it was close around my folks, So I knew that, if I was ever really hungry, I could drive to their house, like a sandwich or something like that. And so I had this little apartment, and the woman I was seeing at the time, that ended badly. And everything was just turning to shit, and I couldn't figure it out. Everything was turning to shit, And so I'd gotten to this point where I had just enough to put on a van And buying a van would mean it was a symbolic act where it's like, I'm buying a van. That means I'm going to continue playing music, or I will take this money, turn on my electricity, and, you know, go to school, get a job, yada, yada, basically give up on music being my primary focus in terms of life, you know. And I'll never forget, I was in my bedroom. The windows were open because it was the only ventilation source. And there I was in August in New Orleans with no electricity. And I'm sitting there on a mattress without any sheets on it because, you know, being young and stupid, I didn't really know much about hygiene. So there I am, just looking up at the ceiling. I'm having this conversation with myself, you know, stripping away. Okay, if I pay my bills, I could do this, and if I buy this van, then I can do that, and blah blah blah. It's going through every single iteration of every single layer of the conversational onion I could go through, right? And it got down after about an hour and a half talking to myself, and I was so beat down. I was so just at my core. And, you know, the question came out, and I heard myself asking this, like, well, Fred, the question is, do you believe in yourself? And I didn't know what the answer was. You know? And I just kind of, you know, waited a minute, took a breath. I didn't know how to say it. I said, yeah. So I went and got the van.
Yeah.
And then I tried to start Cowboy Mouth, and for about 2 months, and we sucked. It was terrible. I was like, shit, I put everything into this, you know. And then, you know, one day I had an idea. It's like, hey, I know John Griffith. He used to play in the Red Rockers. I know he's not doing anything. You know, maybe he's always liked my songs. I played him songs over the years. He liked them a lot. Songs I was written that my old band wouldn't do. And I said, here, I brought him a cassette and said, hey, man, try this out. Learn a couple of these. Why don't you come play with us? And then I talked to the bass player, because, you know, the bass player and the drummer have to have a relationship. And the guy was really talented, but he was a jazz player, which meant he was more about filling the lines, filling the music around the actual beat, as opposed to, you know, creating a force with a low end that a rock band does. I said, when I hit the bass drum, you hit the bass note. He goes, oh, okay. And then John came in, cranked up his amp, and we went from being terrible, I mean, literally terrible, to being really, really good within the space of like 30 seconds. It was one of the wildest experiences of my life. It was just like, then it became kind of like, okay, now what? All of a sudden we had this band. We knew it was good. We just lucked into it. And so fortunately, me being a pretty obstinate guy, I had already booked a tour, even though there wasn't a band or anything like that. It was a little small Southeast tour, but, you know, and it's like, well, I've got some dates booked. Y'all want to play them? It's like, sure. And so what happened was we got our first gig, and it was a big to do at Tipitina's, and we were actually opening for the band I played for. It was a benefit, the band I played for before, so it was our big debut. And we had to have a name, and we must have gone through easily 500 names, and Cowboy Mouth was the only name that all of us liked, that all of us didn't hate, you know. And so the reasoning was, well, listen, if we don't like it, we'll change the name down the road. Let's just give them this. Fine. You know, other people have kind of read so many things in there, and there's a play called Cowboy Mouth where we got the name by this guy named Sam Shepard, and you'd have to look into that to see the relationship of Cowboy Mouth. It's about, you know, finding strength and hope and things like that through, you know, these characters they find it through being a rock and roll star. I had no idea of any of that. I still haven't read the play to this day. I know the last line of the play is somebody asked what it all meant, or what Cowboy Mouth meant, or something like that. And the last line in the play is, it means escape. So, and that's kind of where we got the title for that album. But, you know, it's not really it's not really something. It's not really something that has any overarching meaning. You know, if you look up Cowboy Mouth, it actually means kind of have a Western slang, which is, you know, kind of somebody who curses, or dirty mouth or something like that. But, you know, it's weird how all the meanings of it actually do kind of go in tandem with everything the band has been, you know, but, you know, like I said, if I thought about it too much, I'd probably fuck it up. So
In that case, what's the most memorable climax of experience you can recall? Is there any specific recollection any more potent than the others?
I could sit here and name some things, but once again, that's perspective, you know. I mean, you know, what stands out for me might not stand out for anybody else, you know. You know, I remember that Dave Matthews show that we played, but I also remember being horribly uncomfortable in that situation.
Really?
So,
Why?
but that's my perspective, and that was BS I was dealing with within the band, not the performance.
Okay.
You know, when you live with other people in tandem like that, and it gets really, you know, success exaggerates everything, the good and the bad. And for a long time, about 15 years, I lived in a tour bus, and people think, oh, that's very glamorous. And it is, it's very nice. I wish I had one now. But at the same time, in order to make that work, we had to tour all the time. And so I did not have a strong support system around me in terms of watching out for me and my, you know, mental well-being. You know, I was surrounded, you know, I mean, I was the, I was the monkey. Get out there, monkey.
Yeah.
None of us make money unless you're wild and crazy. Oh, by the way, I get that you're wild and crazy because, you know, yeah, there's so much drama that goes into all of it that's just not worth, you know. At the time, the 2 hours on stage was worth the 22 hours, you know, of pain, of just sweat and struggle and grind and all that type of stuff, you know. So it's not that the show wasn't good, it's just that there were surrounding elements of the show that stuck out to me more than the show. But like, there are certain things with certain shows. Let me try to pick something out here. My goal with the shows initially, this will kind of help, I think, a little bit. When I formed the band, you know, I wasn't always this kind of fully fledged personality on stage, you know. I wasn't sure I could front a band, you know. I'm a drummer. Everybody told me that I couldn't do it, which, you know, kind of made me want to do it. So, but I didn't know if I could. That I wanted to do something different, and that, you know, being a front man, I didn't want to be one of these typical, hey, everybody, let's party, let's get drunk, blah, 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 blah. You know, we're gonna drink a lot, do a lot of drugs, you know, get laid, yada, yada, yada. And, you know, every once in a while I'll throw stuff like that out there just for laughs. But I wanted this to be something, you know, it was the early 90s when we formed, and there was so much, as great as a lot of those bands were, the early 90s bands, they were also so fucking depressing, you know? You know, I love Nirvana and Pearl Jam just like anybody. But at the same time, listening to this onslaught of musical misery all the time, just, it's like, wow, you know, slow down, you know, it's not that bad, you know, it can be if that's the way you want it, or, you know, whatever. But I remember, like one of the first shows, you know, because instead of just being like the rock and roll wild man, it's like, instead of saying something, and I had to kind of train myself to do this. Instead of saying something like, all right, everybody's going to get drunk at the show, we're going to raise hell, woo, 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 you know, type of stuff. Like, hey man, thanks very much. Believe in yourself and anything's possible. Boom, you know, just throwing something different out there. And the reaction I got was really immediate and really tangible. And I noticed people were like hungry for stuff like that, right? Something that was more encouraging than discouraging. Once again, kind of the the difference between love and fear, for lack of a better, I hate to put myself on any sort of lofty emotional plane, because it really wasn't, it wasn't that grandiose of a thought process. It was just kind of like, I want to throw something positive out there, because I know that whatever goes out there will come back to me eventually, you know? And so, believe in yourself, and anything's possible. Life's to be enjoyed, not endured, you know, you know, and are you glad to be alive? Things like that, And in those moments when people are feeling that kind of energy, swirl through them, because that's what it is. You're swirling their energy, and everybody has a decision to make where that energy goes. It's a personal decision. But if I'm up there saying, throw it this way or throw it that way, by anything I'm saying or not saying, doing or not doing within that moment, I help kind of push that. And, if I throw people the idea of something that's more positive, something that's more empowering, the more likely they are to take those energies and use them in some ways that would be more beneficial than harmful. Does that make sense? Even if it's something that sticks in the back of the head and doesn't even come up till like 20 years later, or in your case, 5 years later, you put it out there. People are always going to be responsible for their own decisions. But at the same time, if I'm putting this out there, then, I have to not watch what I do in terms of hesitating, but I also have to understand my small amount of culpability in it as well. Basically, what you put out in the world, you get back. It's that simple. And if I'm going to be given this bullhorn, then I need to watch what I say and do.
Well, the next bit jumps into song and specific song inspirations that may take far more than 10 minutes, I imagine.
Go.
Where's the Rain is one of my favorites. Can you tell me where you were mentally and spiritually when you wrote it?
My dad had just died. He had literally just died. And this song is very strange, because I loved my father, obviously, but it was a lot tougher when my mom died. She had died about 7 years before. It was a lot tougher because there was a lot more unresolved stuff, and, didn't expect her to go the way, as fast as it happened and when it happened. And there was a lot of unresolved stuff. I loved my dad, but at the same time, he died of Parkinson's / Alzheimer's, and he went very slowly. So by the time he passed away, of course I was sad, but I was also relieved that he wasn't suffering anymore.
Right.
Going back to my idea of this life not being all there is, right? And I was sad. I was very sad about my father dying, and it affected me in a lot of ways. I wish we'd had a stronger relationship, but at the same time, he just wasn't. Everything I am personality wise is the complete opposite of what my dad was. He was a very genteel guy. He was very quiet and very, he would never really insert himself into anything to make his presence known. He was a very mild kind of mannered guy, very funny, very bright, but not really somebody he's not somebody who was able to light a fire under a lot of people's asses. But at the same time, when he wanted to get something done, he would do it. Really good dude, and I just missed him. And, the idea came to me, of, when you lose somebody, and, this is a weird thing to say, and I've never said this to anybody, but I was sitting there, it was early in the morning, my son and wife were asleep. It was like 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. I couldn't sleep, or I'd woken up early or something like that. And I was on the, sitting in the living room, looking at the backyard. I was living in central Mississippi at the time. And the whole song just came to me. And I felt like it was a gift from my dad, and that it was a way of kind of expressing what I couldn't express. There's a sadness here. Why isn't it raining? Because it feels like it's raining to me, but it's sunny outside. That feeling that you get when you have extreme loss. Like I'm sure you felt it when you lost your buddy, that feeling of how come the world hasn't destroyed itself? How come everything hasn't fallen apart? It's like, how how are you guys still living? How is life still going on? I'm dead inside. And it's that feeling of just, understanding what was going on, like the whole idea of, let's see, what are the lyrics there? Once upon a time you taught me to love. Once upon a time it seemed like enough. Now, it was the whole idea of going through the grief process, I'm stumbling around my head in my hands.
Hoping against hope, I misunderstand.
Yeah, hoping against hope, I misunderstand that everything I have is gone. Everything I knew was. I don't want to be this kind of. I don't want to be this kind of strong.
Live that kind of. Yeah, that's it.
I don't want to be this kind of strong, or something like that. It's like just not sure if I was prepared to deal with it. Wow, this brings emotion. Huh. Where's the rain? It's like, and what's the second line? Suddenly,
I'm not the person I was. Suddenly, no reason, simply because.
Simply because, yeah.
No.
And it's just the idea of, building your life on this ground that you thought was solid, that all of a sudden isn't. It's like, the grief process. It's just totally the grief. And I know, what is it? And I know I'll get along somehow, but I really need to just sit down right now. And that's kind of, whew. I'm just kind of getting this emotional thing going.
Do you play that one live? Have you ever?
No, it was built around a drum loop. And it's a drum loop that I can't really play very well. And honestly, that record, it was a really good record, but the label didn't put much in terms of push behind it, and then they fell apart afterwards. And there just wasn't much of a desire for the songs,
Okay.
I mean, it gets to the point, look, I'm very proud of everything I've done and written. There's a couple of songs I wish I hadn't written because they're so, it's not, well, let me take that back. That's not true. I look at different songs differently. I wrote The Avenue, I wrote Believe, which I'm very proud of, but I also wrote Kelly Ripa, which is fucking silly. But at the same time, it got me on the Kelly Ripa show 3 times. So there you go,
Believe is actually my next question.
What?
The inspiration for Believe.
Okay.
How did that come about?
Hold on a second. Let me finish this thought. Where's the rain? What's the suddenly the reason, simply because. And I know I'm gonna make it through this somehow. I really need to sit down right now. Okay, what was there? There's a line there. I'm contrary to popular belief, I don't remember everything.
I can see your smile from here slowly as you disappear. I don't want to live my life in fear.
Yeah, exactly. That was a little like message, my interpretation of my relationship with my dad at the time, and just basically kind of, when people leave the earth, their smile disappears as well. And I loved my dad, but at the same time, there was a lot of things in his life I didn't find out until towards the end of his life that he was very unhappy about. And he kept a lot of that unhappiness with him. And, the unhappiness throughout his life kind of manifested as being afraid of things, being afraid to take chances, being afraid to do certain things because of what was expected of him. And my mom too. They both told me that they lived the lives to a certain extent that they thought they were expected to live, and that they kind of, there are a lot of things they wish they had done that they hadn't, and I don't want to live my life in fear. And then the last line is suddenly, what's the last verse? Once upon a time, you taught me to love.
Once upon a time, I taught you to love. Once upon a time, it wasn't enough.
Yeah. Yeah, that was, the child coming into the relationship and basically, God damn it. My son had just been born about 6 months before. And so it was kind of like the continuing of that relationship, but not, Hold on a second. Not wanting to have, not wanting that relationship to end like my dad and mine did. Does that make sense?
With your son, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
We'll reconvene.
Sure.
All right.
All right. Hey, this was fun, Tim. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, bud.
All the best.
See you next time. You too.
This has been a production of Where You At Studios, LLC.